Okay, so I wanted to, unsurprisingly, talk to you about the General Data Protection Regulation. It turned 2 years old last year, so I wanted to reflect on the past, talk about the present, and give you a bit of insight about the future, and then announce some really fun stuff that is coming from Databasix. So this might look like a little bit of a scary slide, but it's not meant to be. So what I wanted to reflect on is what's happened in the past 2 years of the GDPR. Some of you may remember, I certainly do, the week before the 25th of May 2018, there was an absolute bombardment of emails asking for consent, updates to privacy policies, and there was all these horror stories about massive breaches, massive fines. And then come the 25th of May, the massive fines didn't come. So I just wanted to reflect to say there have been a number of violations across Europe of the regulation, and typically people think of the shock and awe in terms of the technical and organisational measures. But what this table clearly shows is actually the biggest fault across the whole of Europe is that people don't have the right lawful basis for processing data. So an example is only last week, an Irish organisation called Tusla was fined because they inadvertently shared information about looked after children to parents that had no right to know where their child was. Massive breach. There was no legal reason for sharing that information. The Dutch Tennis Royal Association sold their data of their members to people. And that's quite shocking. Google, France fined Google quite a lot of money quite early on in the regulation because they had really complex consent on their website. You may remember the Marriot and the British Airways, which are the big fines that the UK has issued. However, they are in debate with the commissioner about if that size fine is going to happen. But they was about Marriott bought a company that had a breach. It wasn't told as part of the sale. They are now bearing the results of that breach and the impact on that on their reputation. British Airways were hacked, and again, only recently EasyJet had the exact same challenge. They've been hacked. PwC, in terms of insufficient fulfillment of data subject rights, they were fined because they were trying to process information on their staff based on consent, which is a bit unfair because if I want to get paid, I shouldn't have to consent to my employer to give you my information. That should be part of my employment contract. And then there were some organisations across Europe that simply didn't understand how to handle data breaches. So the Hungarian Political Party and the National Government Service Centre in Sweden both were fined small amounts of money because they didn't notify the commissioner in time when they had a breach. So breaches are happening and have happened consistently throughout the last 2 years, but it's not just technical issues. People are getting various things wrong with the regulation. And you may have seen, probably in about March, April time, there was this upswell of emails that started coming out to say, here's an update to our privacy policy, and here's how we engage with you. And people started relating that back to the 25th of May 2018, and that was slightly different. Those messages that came out earlier this year were really about updates to the services. But again, the challenge would be, did they have the right lawful basis for sending you that communication? So there's a lot gone on in the past 2 years. And what I wanted to bring you to is to now, is like, are we learning anything in the present situation? Now, when I did a webinar at the beginning of this year, pandemic wasn't one of the things I talked about when I was talking about data protection. However, what the coronavirus has done is it's galvanized organizations, large and small, to move forward their digital transformation. Now, what I am seeing is that not necessarily people are considering the data protection challenges. So Today, with the current situation where we have remote workforces, and the reality is a remote workforce is likely going to be the foreseeable future for a lot of us, we need to make sure that any technology we are deploying to those staff, whether it be the likes of Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Hangouts, Breathe HR, Bright HR, or fun stuff like House Party, we need to make sure that all of those systems, when we are making that decision to invest in that they are compliant with data protection laws, and that we have made the necessary risk assessment for that. So what I saw in the early days of the lockdown was a massive movement towards Zoom. Now, Zoom have absolutely stated they prioritized ease of use over security, and in the last 8 weeks have been pushing out security updates like no one's business, because they've had quite a lot of bad press about the lack of data protection and security measures they put in place. So today, when we are looking at the new ways that we are working, we have to consider data protection, and we have to consider what are the greatest risks. The greatest risks today still are sending emails to people with everybody in the CC box rather than the blind copy box. Today, we are still seeing data protection breaches where individuals are uploading information via maybe a Zoom conference call or a Slack team call with someone outside of their organization that shouldn't be seeing that information. So the everyday errors are still happening today. So whilst in the last 2 years there's been the shock and awe of not having the right technical measures in place, human error continues to be one of the biggest challenges that we are facing when it comes to data protection. So that's great. We need to be moving towards a more dynamic digital world, but let's not forget data protection, so that we don't, when we're thinking about our future, and there's a lot of people now easing out of lockdown and thinking about, okay, how do we take our business forward? How does the regulation support the growth? So in no way is data protection or the general data protection regulation meant to be seen as something that prohibits your growth. In actual fact, it's a framework that allows you to do it if you put the right processes in place. But when we're thinking about growing, we simply shouldn't be prioritizing convenience over the security of our staff, of our customers, of our supply chain, because the impact will be on our reputation and how people trust us. So whilst you may get a financial fine at some point in time in the future, the immediate impact is on trust and reputation. So when we're thinking about GDPR in the future, what I talked about in January, and it's still very much the case today, is that Brexit is still happening. I've seen nothing that indicates that come next year we are not outside of the European Union. So when we're thinking about next steps, we have to be thinking about, do you know your flows of data? Do you know your customer information? Is it coming from Europe into the UK? Or do you have a lot of the new software systems that you've adopted in the current situation based outside of the UK? And how are they going to cope when we are no longer part of Europe and we're no longer classed as one of the member states, and we need to demonstrate our compliance more robustly to everybody else, including Europe, including our European customers, including customers that we may have in the US. They will be asking us to demonstrate our compliance, and we simply can't say the transfer of data, for example, is covered by the European Union, because it won't be. So think about Brexit. I know we don't want to at the moment, but what is the impact on data protection and on you, and what are the flows of data? There has been an incredibly increase in class actions, and we think this is something that's going to continue to happen. British Airways have got a current class action against them, and only last week an Irish law firm have taken up the case for EasyJet, where customers feel that they have been compromised because of the EasyJet breach, and they are now going to collectively put an action against EasyJet. So we think that this might be something that's going to continue to increase over time. So we need to be thinking about making sure we have the right security measures in place so that we're never part or never having to respond to a class action. But the other thing we have to be really mindful of is new technology. So it's been really great to see increases in communication tools being used. It's great to be able to see that people can work in remote locations and grow their business. But we also need to be thinking about new technology. So things such as facial recognition, things such as increased reliance on artificial intelligence. So if in your organization you are thinking about using facial recognition, or for example, I had an example the other week where someone told me that to be able to demonstrate that their staff on construction sites were actually following the rules and wearing PPE, they wanted to deploy CCTV around the site to be able to watch their staff. Now, typically, CCTV is about making sure your site is secure, not necessarily being used to watch people. So it's more of a surveillance. So existing technology used in a new way, we have to consider the data protection risks and be cautious of that. And I think a fantastic example at the moment is the track and trace applications that are being rolled out across Europe. We now have a lot of information being used on us and collected on us about location, about whether or not we've been in contact with people that have had the coronavirus and being given advice about lockdown and self-isolating. So if we are looking at adopting these types of new apps because it will help us as a business, we have to think about the impact on the privacy of individuals and conduct privacy impact assessments. So why is that useful to know past, present and the future? Because you should have a toolbox to hand that you can dip in and out of. So I've got 10 questions. This is being recorded, so you'll have a copy of these slides that I think you should all be thinking about 2 years on from the regulation coming into force and will help you in the future. So I won't go through all of them because you can read them on the screen, but I wanted to pick up a few. So have you trained your staff in the past 2 years? Training is a requirement under the regulation and it is something that will help reduce human error. So have you trained your staff in the past 2 years? Number 7, have you completed data privacy impact assessments for new systems and data processing that you may be introduced and you may have introduced in the last couple of months? Have you got processes in place that could handle a breach if it was to happen? Only yesterday I had a phone call from a client that said, Kelly, we've accidentally shared information with the wrong person. What do we do? And it's great to be able to phone a friend and be able to give advice, but it's also, what are your internal processes? Would your staff know what to do if you had a breach and how you would then handle that, and whether or not you have to notify the commissioner? And my favourite is about retention. We all want to hold on to information forever. The regulation doesn't support that. So in the last 2 years, if you set a retention period for your marketing data to only have it for 2 years, have you checked to see that you should still be holding on to that data? So what are the practical things that you are doing to manage your retention? Which leads me nicely into some fantastic news that we are releasing in 2 weeks' time, based on seeing what's happened in the last 2 years, getting feedback from people about, we really want tools, Kelly, that can help us. It's all well and good having a policy, but how do we actually respond? What do we need to do in the case of a subject access request? So in our toolbox, which is coming on the 15th of June, we are going to provide practical tools to customers where if they have a subject access request, they'll have a video about how to manage that and what they need to be capturing. We'll give you tools about how to communicate with your staff, about best practice with email, video conferencing. We're going to provide guidance about how you should respond to breaches. So videos and tools in our toolbox. If you are interested, drop us an email at info@ or book a half an hour consultation via our booth. And then what we do is not just our toolbox. We do provide data protection services. We do provide on-site training and our e-learning course, and we do provide retained support. So we have a range of services that could be available and that could be of use to you. And we have just launched our podcast series. So we're on Spotify, LinkedIn, and Google Play, where Regina and I talk about fun stuff about data protection. Last week we talked about EasyJet and a grandmother being told she needed to delete her grandchildren's information from Facebook. So by all means, take a listen.